Today, we're going to talk a little bit about Mother's Day. We're going to, celebrate that together. I've got a few things that I want to say to mothers, and I also have a few things that I think might just apply to all of us as we think about just what it means to celebrate on a holiday, and what it means, what motherhood means, and even just the reflection of God's nurture, care, protection, provision. Just an example of all that motherhood really points us to in the care of God for us, His children. There's so many times in the Bible where God actually refers to Himself with motherly characteristics. He refers to Himself as a hen, who would gather his chicks under His feathers or under His wings. And Jesus even mentions that, he's quoting as well, but Jesus even mentions that how often he was praying for Jerusalem, just saying how rebellious they are, and he's praying and he says, how often I would have just gathered you like a mother hen gathers her chicks. How I long for you. Paul, the apostle, as he writes in the Bible, several times that he makes reference of his care and deep concern for the churches as a motherly care and concern for them, how that they nurtured and cared for these people in leading them to Christ. So there's quite a few others like that, but the scriptures give a positive view of motherhood, and for us as we think about it today, it really is a reflection of God's care and His love. And so we want to celebrate that together. The problem, though, for us is that in this life and in this experience, holidays really come with mixed emotions, don't they? I think it's worth acknowledging that. We're going to acknowledge what I'm about to acknowledge every year. So if you've been here the last several years, then you're going to hear the next 5 minutes or so are just going to be what I've said every year, which are 3 main points that I want us to remember on special holidays as a church family. I want you to embrace this on these special holidays and remember one another. The first thing I want you to see is that really as we make memories on Mother's Day and we celebrate Mother's Day, I want us to acknowledge that it can also be a difficult day for some people as well. And the verse that I like to reference, which I'm going to read for us, is in Romans chapter 12, verse 15. So in Romans 12:15, it says, "Rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep." Or, as it says in the NLT, "Be happy with those who are happy and weep with those who weep." Now, I want us to remember that as we think about each other in this church family, because as we think about Mother's Day, Christmas, Father's Day, other special holidays that the family usually gets together, we have to remember that there are people, actually some who are very happy, some who are sad and weeping, and then some who have a mix of emotions, who are glad for the blessings they have and sad for some of the losses they've endured. We want to remember each other, especially on a day like Mother's Day. And one of the things that I think stands out to me in the scriptures is how desirable motherhood is. So there's women in the Bible who are calling out to God to give them children. And you can study some of those examples like Hannah and others who are praying for God to give them children. And I think just the sheer desire for motherhood really indicates that we're wired this way and that God has given us that desire as a real blessing. It's not a curse is what I'm saying. There might be some cultures today or just some ideas or notions that succumbing to motherhood would be sort of a second-class status. It would be sort of an unpreferred destiny. It would be something that would hold us back, hold me back, or hold our family back. And so I want to dispel that notion. Motherhood is a desirable thing. It's a worthy thing. It's a thing worthy to be celebrated. It's a gift from God. And so it's right to celebrate. It's right to worship. It is good. And I think for us it's good to just take some time and thank God for the picture of motherhood, the picture that motherhood is of His love and care for us. It's right to take some time and think about that. And it's also right to just take a little bit of time and acknowledge the mothers in our lives, the spiritual mothers, the physical mothers, the stepmothers, those who really took us under their wing when we didn't have a mother, those other folks in our lives who really have cared for us in that way, and to acknowledge them because it is a good thing. Now, as I mentioned, though, while motherhood is great, it's hard. I can't say that from experience. I just know that being a dad is hard, and I know also that being a mother is hard. But even not just being a mother, but just the idea of mothers in our lives can really be sort of a tough or a tension-filled concept for us, because I think for a lot of us, it hasn't gone perfectly, it hasn't gone smoothly. There's been tension, there's been issues that we've faced. There's people in our church family who have unfortunately can't have children, some who have lost children. There are actually people with wayward children in our family, a church family. There are people who didn't have a mother growing up, or who did have a mother but have since lost their mother now that they've become an adult. I guess I could go on and explain the other scenarios, strained relationship with mother, struggling. Some mothers are struggling with patience. Some mothers are struggling with love for their children and feel some guilt and shame about that. I think there's just so many scenarios that we could point to and say, I like motherhood, it's worth celebrating, but we need to admit that it's hard. It's hard for us, it's hard for some of us around us here in this church family. So when I think about that, there are people today who are actually hurting, or at least, for me, as I think about it, it's probably likely that most of us just have mixed emotions. There's a sense of joy in Mother's Day because of the idea of motherhood or the perspective of being a mother, something like that. But there's also just mixed with feelings of sorrow at times for the things that we had hoped would come true or hoped would be real and never did really materialize, or for the losses that we've endured, as I mentioned before. So there's a mix of those things for us. And that's why I want us to remember that verse, Romans 12:15. It really is a unifying verse for us as a family, and it's going to cause us to flourish. Here's what I mean. In Romans 12:15, he actually says, "Be happy with those who are happy and weep with those who weep." And so for those of us in celebration mode today, I think we need to be sensitive and really to care for those who find it hard to celebrate today. And so while we celebrate, let's remember those people. Let's pray for them. Let's console them. I would say open yourself up to invite them in to the joy of the things that you've experienced. And so open yourself up to invite them in. But then I would say also open yourself up to enter into their experience as well. And I think you'll find some mutual encouragement there. We'll be able to encourage those who are low, and we'll actually be able to temper some of our highs with realizing that this really is a gift and nothing to be taken for granted. You see, it can really build unity in our church when we remember one another. And even those who find Mother's Day difficult, particularly in a church with 1,000 children, I can imagine that it's difficult on days like this. And so I would encourage you to do the same thing, to open yourself up and to invite others into some of that pain or invite others into some of that struggle, and let us meet you there. Share what's happening in your life. And then I would say open yourself up to borrow from the joy and experiences of others as we become closely knit as a family. And once again, I think it raises some of us who are low, and it tempers some of that high, so that in all we just begin to be grateful to God for the things we do have, grateful to God for the people and children and families and mothers in our midst. And I think that will actually be a unifying factor. Can you agree with that? I would like for us to do that as a church family and just be considerate of one another. Now, there's a third truth, though. Mother's Day is great. It's worth celebrating. We're not going to be ashamed of celebrating mothers. It's a picture of something. It's a picture of God. But it's also hard, and so we're also not going to shy away from the hard things in our church. And we're going to engage that. We're going to encourage, we're going to listen, and we're going to share with one another. But then there's the third truth, which is that motherhood really does, as I've mentioned already, this is the third truth we're going to lay hold on, which is that motherhood is a picture, a shadow of a reality. It's not the utmost reality, it's a picture of the utmost reality. And so for us, I want us to remember that the love and nurture of God is the utmost identity that we have as His children. God really comforts us and He corrects us with a love that surpasses the love of any mother. As hard as that might be, or as hard as that might be to comprehend, the love of God surpasses that of motherhood and fatherhood. And so we need to lay hold of the motherhood and fatherhood, if I can say that, of God. Lay hold of His love and care and nurture for us. And I think there's a verse that I really want us to turn to. It's in Deuteronomy chapter 6. So you can turn there in your Bibles or you can get there on your phone. I'm also going to read it on the screen. But for us, as I think about this, a healthy and nurturing, disciplining love from a mother really is a reflection of God's love for us. And so I want us to run to God and remember this. Now, the verse I'm going to read is an encouragement for us to lay hold of God as our primary source of identity, our primary source of validation, our primary source of significance. What I want for us is to be wholeheartedly devoted to God so that other things don't become God in our life. The worst thing we can do to our children is to make them God. It's the worst thing we can do to them. It's setting ourselves up and our families up and our children up for failure. And so I think what I want to do is just to encourage us to remember our identity in God as His dearly loved children, and then to remember that all of these secondary identities can actually flourish when we let God be God over those things. Okay, so let's get to that. Deuteronomy chapter 6, I'd like to tie it all together here. This is a passage that a lot of people use in dedicating their children. So we'll just read that today. Deuteronomy 6, verse 1, we're going to read through verse 9. These are the commands, decrees, and regulations that the Lord your God commanded me to teach you. You must obey them in the land you are about to enter and occupy, and you and your children and grandchildren must fear the Lord your God as long as you live. If you obey all His decrees and commands, you will enjoy a long life. Listen closely, Israel, and be careful to obey, and then all will go well with you, and you will have many children in the land flowing with milk and honey, just as the Lord, the God of your ancestors, promised you. Now, this is the passage I want you to see. Verse 4. Listen, O Israel. This is the Shema. About 4 weeks ago, I actually mentioned this in the message that Sunday. So we did talk a little bit about this, but he says, listen, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone. The Lord is our God, the Lord is the only God. He is one, He is the singular God. There are no other gods. And that includes any other secondary identity or any other secondary responsibility or any other possession we own, any other status we want. Nothing else can become God to us or of utmost value or something like that except for God alone. So he's calling for wholehearted discipleship here, wholehearted following of God, wholehearted devotion. Can I say that word? I love that word, devotion, wholehearted devotion to God. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone, and you must love the Lord your God with all of your heart, all of your soul, all of your strength, and you must commit yourselves, this is where we get the word wholehearted, you must commit yourselves wholeheartedly to these commands that I am giving you today. Repeat them again and again to your children. Talk about them when you're at home and when you're on the road, when you're going to bed and when you're getting up. Tie them to your hands, wear them on your forehead as reminders, write them on the doorpost of your homes and on your gates. As we read this passage, I'm really just two things stand out to me, and very quickly I'll just mention those two things. The first thing is that in order to really be a parent, to be a good parent, to be a parent who really is raising these children the way that we would want them to be raised in the nurture and care of God, we have to ourselves be wholeheartedly devoted to God. There's just no other way around that. Wholeheartedly, with every ounce of our heart, every ounce of our being is really the essence there. Devoted to God in every way. And I think when we're wholeheartedly devoted to God, then nothing else really there'll be other things that compete for His place in our lives, but nothing else takes the place of God. And then everything else, once God has His rightful place and we are wholeheartedly devoted to Him in every area of our life, those areas actually begin to flourish. Your parenting will flourish when we stop making our children or our family God. We make and let God be God in our lives, listen to Him, do what He's asking us to do by way of raising these kids, to discipline them and to teach them and to instruct them, to take the role of a parent and to actually guide them in the way of Christ and in the way of the Lord and in the way of His Word. As we do that and yield ourselves to Him, we will see that those relationships and those other areas of our lives will begin to flourish. So the first step is to be wholeheartedly devoted to God. And the second thing that I think I want us to point out is that he says here in verse 7, we'll go back to verse 7 and look at that. Repeat them again and again to your children. The number one job of a parent is to repeat things. I mean, would you agree? The number one job of a parent is to repeat things. So then why are we so frustrated when we have to repeat things? It's the number one job of a parent is to repeat things. And so I don't want us to get frustrated having to repeat things. Now, there's some children that really don't need a lot of repetition. And then there are other children, like I was as a kid, who need a lot of repetition, need a lot of repeating. Be patient, friends. Be patient, parents. We all need repetition. That's why every Sunday when we get together, we're going to point each other to the good news of Jesus Christ. Every Sunday, my parenting style, as it were, of our church, as I'm teaching and instructing and modeling, is to remind and to remind, to repeat and to repeat the good news of Jesus Christ until it just settles in our souls and becomes part of our reality. That's what needs to happen with our children. Don't be discouraged with having to repeat things to your children. Here's what I really want us to settle on. Before you remind your children, remind yourself. The real problem here is not just that I'm not reminding my kids. I'm reminding them. The problem is that the tension in our home comes when I forget to be reminded of who I am and to be reminded of who they are. The disrespect in a home comes when parents forget to remind themselves of who they are. You're not just their parent. Moms, this is a word of encouragement. Your greatest identity is not to be a mom, but to be a daughter. Rest in who you belong to as a child of God. That encouragement spans for all the men and all the women in this church. Let's rest in who we are in God, and He will cause those other areas of our lives to begin to flourish. It's just a quick call for us to surrender ourselves to God with wholehearted devotion. And as we think about our children, the need for repetition in their lives reminds us that we need to constantly be reminding ourselves of the good news of Jesus, who we belong to, and all that's true, so that we can then lead them into those same realities. Well, I want us to pray, and I'm going to wrap this up today, and the band's going to come. We'll just have a few minutes, and then we'll need to clear this space. So will you just join me in prayer, and then let's just contemplate these things together. Lord, thank you.